This presentation on Vesper-Song of the Reverend Samuel Marsden by Kenneth Slessor will be in three parts. Firstly, what's it about? Secondly, what is the poet doing? And finally, how does it relate to the theme of human experience? In the Vesper-Song of Reverend Samuel Marsden, Slessor is writing in the style of satire, or he's writing in a satirical voice. So what's it about? It's a personal attack on an early Australian, a real historical figure, Reverend Samuel Marsden, who was one of the first heads of the Church of England in Australia. He was called the senior chaplain. Marsden was also a magistrate in Parramatta, where he was known for handing out harsh sentences, even by the standards of the day at the time. The poem draws attention to the hypocrisy of a man of faith physically harming people while defending those actions, even celebrating them as a type of offering to God and as a generous act. As you're reading the poem, make sure you look up any words that you don't know. And there's a few curly words in there. Note from the title, Vesper-Song. Vespers is a type of prayer said in the evening. Even in today's liturgical calendar, Vespers is a set prayer every evening for priests and anyone saying the prayers of the Holy Office. So the Vesper-Song then is Slessor imagining this is what Marsden would be thinking at the end of each day, like a reflection at the end of a day. In the title, Vesper and Reverend makes religious hypocrisy a key issue here. Think about if the title of the poem was something different, how the overall tone might change. If it was called Reflections of Magistrate Samuel Marsden, perhaps the religious hypocrisy wouldn't be such an obvious target. So what is the poet doing? Let's home in on three particular techniques or strategies or tools that Slessor is using. We'll talk about rhyme, ridicule, and religious diction. It's 3 R's, so it's easy to remember. But as always, you need to be able to talk about any technique that you highlight. It's no good simply saying the poem rhymes and this is to make the poem stand out or to make it easier to remember. With rhyme, what can we actually say about rhyme? Why is he using it? What's the effect? This is a very serious poem and a really dark theme, religious hypocrisy and violence. So why use a rhyming style that creates such a sing-song feeling? Well, in this case, the use of incongruity suits the satirical style of the poem, and it makes a mockery of Marsden. Being written in the persona of Marsden, the rhyme gives the impression that Marsden has no concept of the seriousness of his actions. Let's look at ridicule. How does Slessor use ridicule? Notice how this poem builds in its level of what is considered acceptable. The introductory concept of punishment to make someone better is somewhat acceptable. We accept to some extent that if someone is held accountable, if someone's punished for their actions, maybe it can cure them, to use the words of the character in the poem. But the ridiculing tone grows as the persona's words go from justifying his actions to celebrating them, to then even hoping that he can continue to punish people for eternity. What starts out as somewhat acceptable quickly becomes cringeworthy. Quite humorously, at the very conclusion of the poem, Slessor has Marsden hoping to actually spend eternity in hell. Religious diction. The use of religious language throughout this poem is what gives it this cringeworthy feeling and points us to a very low view of Marsden. Slessor is highly critical of Marsden's theology, his understanding of God, so every reference to religion has the effect of undermining Marsden's view of God. Sacramental, litany, grace, velum, a few words to look up there. Scourged to paradise. In every usage of these words, Slessor is taking something not entirely foreign to either the legal system or religious beliefs of the time, But because of the persona's joyful tone, he highlights, the poet Slessor highlights the lack of harmony between words and action. The lack of harmony between Marsden's misplaced beliefs and the actions he's carrying out. So why is Slessor writing about this strange person, Samuel Marsden, more than a century later? He's not criticising a person of the time. Marsden isn't someone that he's trying to punish. Marsden's long gone at this point. Why is he writing about him? Well, the themes endure as they do today. The Reverend Samuel Marsden is an emblem of misuse of religious authority and an emblem of hypocrisy. By criticising Marsden, Slessor is sounding a warning to all other authorities and religious figures in his time in the 20th century. Even today, it still sounds to us as a warning here in the 21st century. The theme of hypocrisy and religion doesn't really feature as heavily in other poems you're studying. So what connections can you make between Vesper-Song and some of the other poems? Stylistically, there are some similarities to William Street and Gulliver. In both cases there, Slessor is playing with duality. In William Street, he contrasts between a perception of the ugly and a perception of the lovely. In Gulliver, he seeks out purpose by describing a complete lack of purpose. Here in Vesper-Song, we might say he celebrates honour by decrying the dishonour of this character. Perhaps under the theme of passion, you could make connections between Wild Grapes and Vespers. Can you argue perhaps for both poems to be about the danger embedded in human passions? Under the theme of power, you could make strong connections between Gulliver and Vesper-Song. In one case, the persona has all of the power over another person, while in the other poem, in Gulliver, the persona is seen as the victim of a system which they can't control.